The universe had fallen silent in the wake of war. The once thriving battlegrounds of distant star systems now lay abandoned, their once vibrant civilizations reduced to whispers in the vast expanse of space. For years, peace had reigned, but that peace was fragile, like the first breath after a storm, quiet but ominous. Back on Earth, the scars of the galactic conflict still lingered, but humanity was rebuilding. Cities, once reduced to rubble, were now flourishing with new technologies and innovations. Governments had restructured, forming a fragile coalition of Earth's powers to protect their future. But beneath the surface, a quiet fear began to stir. The world, though seemingly at peace, could feel something creeping in the shadows. In a hidden, forgotten corner of Earth, a small team of old war heroes had lived in exile, their legendary deeds fading into myth. Some were former generals, soldiers of unmatched skill, and others had once wielded technology that could reshape entire worlds. They had saved humanity countless times, but in the aftermath of the war, they had disappeared, taking their secrets with them. Their silence had become as much a part of history as their victories. Commander Cal Draxon, once Earth's most celebrated leader, sat alone in a darkened room. The walls were bare except for a single faded map of the galaxy, marked with the routes of old battles. His eyes were heavy with the weight of lost years, but something in the pit of his stomach gnawed at him. The nightmares had returned, and the visions were too real to ignore. The message came in the dead of night. It was encrypted, a relic from their time in battle, but the signal was clear. A strange energy spike, unlike anything they had seen before, had appeared near a forgotten colony on the edge of the galaxy. The coordinates matched those of a long-dead enemy fleet, one that should not have been there. Someone, or something, had found their way back. Cal's heart raced. He hadn't expected to hear from the old team again, not after everything that had happened. The last time he saw his comrades, they had sworn never to fight again. But this was different. He felt it deep in his bones. The galaxy was stirring once more, and it was no coincidence that the old war had returned with a vengeance. He sent a signal out to the rest of the Vanguard, his old comrades, each of them living in isolation, trying to forget who they had been. Their replies were hesitant at first. There was distrust, fear, and anger at being pulled back into the fight. The heroes had been shattered by the wars they had fought, haunted by the things they had done and seen. Some had left humanity behind, wanting nothing to do with the destruction they had witnessed. Others had tried to blend into civilian life, hoping that peace could be more than just an illusion. But when the message reached them, when the old team was called back to action, there was no choice but to respond. Tessa, the brilliant tactician with a sharp mind and an unyielding resolve, was the first to answer. Her voice, once full of confidence, now trembled with uncertainty. She had built a new life on the edge of a dying star system, away from the chaos. Her response was short, clipped. "What do we do now?" The second was Nura, the rogue soldier who had disappeared into the depths of space after the war, a ghost. She had become a mercenary, living off the grid, keeping her hands clean of politics and war. Her voice crackled through the communication line, cold as the void she had embraced. "I never wanted to come back, but if this is real, we have no choice." And then the third, Rylos, the silent engineer whose creations had once shaped the weapons of Earth's greatest victories. He had lost his passion for invention after the war, retreating to a quiet world where he could hide from his past. His voice, low and steady, broke through the static. "We either face it now, or we face the end." Cale looked at the map once more. The journey would be long, and the risks high, but they had never backed down before. The Vanguard was back, and this time they would not be fighting for their lives. They would be fighting for the very survival of the galaxy. The silence was broken. The air inside the old ship felt heavy as the Vanguard assembled for the first time in years. Each hero took their place around the table. a place that had once been filled with camaraderie and shared purpose. Now, it felt like a gathering of strangers. Their faces, once familiar and reassuring, were now marked by the passage of time, wrinkles, scars, and haunted eyes that told stories of battles fought and lost. Cal Draxon stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edges, trying to steady his nerves. "We all know why we're here," he said, his voice sharp but filled with the weight of unspoken history. "There's a new threat, and we have to stop it before it spreads. But we need to trust each other, or we're already dead." Tessa leaned forward, her fingers tapping on the table as she scanned the room. She had been Earth's most brilliant strategist, but the years of isolation had dulled her edges. The fire that once burned brightly in her eyes was now a flickering ember. "Trust? How can we trust anything after all we've been through, Kale? We've all seen how easy it is for someone to turn against us." Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying anger that none of them had seen before. "What if this is another trap? What if we're walking straight into a bigger war?" Nara, who had been silent until now, cracked a smile, one that was more dangerous than reassuring. Her eyes flicked toward Tessa, then back to Kale. "If it's a trap, we'll deal with it the same way we've always dealt with things. Hit hard, hit fast, and leave nothing standing. Simple as that." But Kale wasn't convinced. "This is different," he muttered, glancing at the holographic display of the enemy's last known location. "These aren't just random raids. Someone is pulling the strings, someone powerful, someone we've fought before, someone who knows our every move." Rylos, the quiet engineer, finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "We know how this works. Whoever is behind this, they're playing a long game. We need to be ready for anything, and we need to find out exactly what we're up against." He tapped a few buttons on the console, and the image of the energy spike appeared on the screen. "This is no ordinary attack. Whatever caused this anomaly, it's not something we've dealt with before. We need to investigate, and we need to move fast." The room fell silent. They all knew that Rylos was right. The mission had to be more than just stopping another enemy fleet. The stakes had risen, and they had no choice but to dig deeper. Tessa crossed her arms, her eyes scanning the map. "So what's the plan, Kale? You've been quiet about the details. We can't afford to waste time." Kale let out a heavy sigh, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We'll split into teams. Nara, you and Rylos will head to the colony and gather intelligence. The rest of us will prepare for a full-scale assault if it comes to that. We need to know who we're dealing with and what their objective is. Whatever happens, we can't let them take the next step." A ripple of unease passed through the group. The mission was clear, but the tension between them was palpable. They were all heroes, once feared across the galaxy, but now they were fractured, each of them carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. Nara stood up first, slinging her weapons belt over her shoulder. "I'll be on the front lines, like always. I'll find out who's behind this, and I'll make them regret it." Tessa's eyes lingered on Nara for a moment, then shifted to Kale. "We can't afford mistakes. The galaxy is at stake." There was something different in her voice, an edge that hadn't been there before. "If we're going to do this, we do it right." Kale nodded, a flicker of the old leader returning to his eyes. "We're in this together, no matter what. Stay sharp, stay focused. We'll do what we've always done, fight until we can't anymore." With that, the Vanguard disbanded. As the team members went to their stations, Kale lingered for a moment, looking out into the dark expanse of space. The silence that had once been a blessing now felt like a curse. The Vanguard had returned from the shadows, but the true enemy was still hidden, waiting for them to make their move. As the ship's engines roared to life, the team readied themselves for the unknown. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they knew one thing for certain: the quiet peace they had hoped for was gone, and the battle for the galaxy's future had just begun. The tension in the air grew thick as the Vanguard neared their destination. The stars outside the ship's window flickered, their light dimming as they approached the outskirts of the galaxy. The colony they were headed toward was once a thriving hub of trade and research, nestled in the shadow of a distant star system. But now it was little more than a dying outpost, with only a fraction of its original population remaining. The energy spike had originated here, and it was unlike anything Kale or his team had ever encountered. The colony itself looked eerily deserted. As the Vanguard ship descended through the atmosphere, the once bustling streets below lay silent, its buildings half collapsed and overgrown with creeping vines. The air was thick with the remnants of an old war, the dust of forgotten battles, and the faint scent of something rotting beneath the surface. Nara and Rylos were the first to step onto the ground. They moved quickly, their boots crunching against the debris as they made their way toward the colony's central command center. Rylos kept his eyes trained on the surroundings, his fingers brushing over the weapons hidden beneath his coat. His once sharp mind, honed by years of building the tools of war, was now focused on something deeper. The network that connected the old systems, the ones that had once been the backbone of Earth's defensive grid. "I don't like this, Nara," Rylos muttered, his voice low as he glanced over his shoulder. "The signals are all wrong. This place is locked down tighter than a military fortress, but it doesn't make sense. There's no life here, but there's too much activity underground." Nara didn't respond right away, her sharp eyes scanning the ruins ahead. She had fought in the shadows for so long that the silence had become second nature. But something about this place made her uneasy. The buildings, abandoned for years, felt too still, too calm. "Let's find out what's hiding," she said, her voice cold and detached as ever. But there was a flicker of something, concern, maybe, that she didn't let slip. "We know something's here, we just have to dig." The two of them made their way through the ruins, avoiding the faint signs of patrols, remnants of security drones that had been deactivated long ago. It wasn't until they reached the heart of the colony, where the central command center lay, that they found their first sign of trouble, a set of encrypted messages flashing across a terminal. Nara crouched down beside it, activating the console. Rylos stood guard, his back pressed against the walls as he listened for any sign of movement. The messages were filled with unfamiliar codes, but they quickly began to form a pattern. They were too complex to be mere junk data. This was the work of someone intelligent, someone with access to the most secretive corners of Earth's infrastructure. "Someone's been running a ghost operation here for years," Nara muttered under her breath. "This colony, it wasn't abandoned. It was abandoned by design." Rylos moved closer. "Who's pulling the strings?" Nara's fingers flew across the console as she decrypted the messages. "This," she said, her voice laced with disbelief, "isn't just about an attack. It's about control. They've been manipulating the data, redirecting the energy spikes, and wait, this isn't from a random group. This is Earth's own government." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Someone in Earth's command structure had orchestrated this. They'd allowed this outpost to be forgotten, allowed this network of control to flourish in the shadows. The enemy wasn't just some alien invader, it was far worse. This was a betrayal from within. Why would they let this happen? Nara whispered, her voice hoarse. Why allow something so dangerous to exist under their noses? Before Rylos could answer, the console emitted a shrill alarm, signaling that they'd been detected. A flicker of movement caught Nara's eye as figures emerged from the shadows, human figures armed and ready. Nara's pulse quickened, but her stance remained calm. "This isn't just a trap, it's a message." "Time to send one back," Rylos said, a dark gleam in his eye as he readied his weapon. As the first wave of soldiers charged toward them, Nara drew her pistols, firing with surgical precision. Each shot took down a soldier in the blink of an eye, but it wasn't enough. More kept coming, pouring out of the darkness like a tide of steel and flesh. "What the hell is going on here?" Rylos growled, as he brought down another enemy with a quick burst of fire. "They've been lying to us," Nara said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And it's only going to get worse from here." As the Vanguard fought through the increasing onslaught, the shadow of something much larger loomed overhead. Earth's betrayal was no longer just a possibility. It was the truth, and it was just the beginning of a deeper conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything they had fought for. The stakes were higher than ever, and the team had just entered a web of lies that even they might not be able to escape. The fight raged on in the heart of the colony. Nara and Rylos moved through the chaos with a practiced efficiency, their weapons disintegrating enemy forces one after another. The soldiers they faced weren't ordinary. They were highly trained, organized, almost like mercenaries, but with an unsettling familiarity with Earth's defensive tactics. This wasn't just a rogue operation. Someone had put these people here, and the deeper Nara and Rylos dug, the more certain they became that the truth was far darker than they could have imagined. After minutes that felt like hours, the last of the attackers fell to the ground, their bodies sprawled across the cracked concrete. Nara wiped her brow, surveying the damage. "We need to get inside the command center now," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Before we're swarmed again." Rylos nodded, his fingers flying over a control panel as he accessed the hidden entrance beneath the rubble. A section of the floor slid open with a low rumble, revealing a metal staircase that descended into the darkness below. Without waiting for a response, Nara was already moving down the stairs, her sharp instincts driving her. Rylos followed closely behind, his mind racing. This wasn't just a military operation gone wrong. This was something far more insidious. The encrypted data had pointed to a conspiracy, one that reached all the way to the highest levels of Earth's government. Someone somewhere was playing a game with the lives of billions, and the Vanguard had just stumbled onto the first piece of the puzzle. The hallway beneath the colony's surface was dimly lit, lined with outdated consoles and dusty equipment that hadn't seen use in years. But beneath the grime, Rylos could still see signs of recent activity. A humming vibration lingered in the air, and the faint scent of machinery overheating filled his nostrils. This facility was operational, but the power wasn't coming from any of Earth's usual sources. As they moved deeper, the silence was oppressive. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls, and every corner felt like it might conceal another trap. The further they ventured, the more the sense of unease grew, until it settled into something heavier, an undeniable feeling that they weren't alone. Nara held up her hand, signaling for Rylos to stop. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor ahead. The flicker of a shadow moved at the far end. Rylos raised his weapon instinctively, but Nara shook her head. "No, let's get eyes on it first." She gestured for him to move to the side. Together, they crept forward, pressing themselves into the shadows. As they rounded a corner, they saw the source of the movement, a group of figures, dressed in high-tech armor, speaking in low voices. These weren't standard soldiers. They were wearing insignias Kel had never seen before, symbols that didn't belong to any of the known factions of Earth. They were too advanced, too mysterious. One of the figures, a tall woman with short-cropped hair, noticed something, a faint sound, perhaps the scrape of a boot on metal. She turned sharply, her hand reaching for a weapon at her side. Before Nara could react, Rylos fired a single shot, disabling the figure's rifle and sending her crashing to the ground. The other soldiers reacted quickly, but Nara and Rylos were faster. In a blur of motion, they neutralized the rest of the group. The whole exchange took mere seconds, and the soldiers were down, quietly, efficiently, and without hesitation. Breathing heavily, Nara approached the fallen woman, pulling a data chip from her armor. "I think we found what we were looking for." Rylos knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse. "Alive. Barely." He grinned darkly, then focused on the chip. "Let's see who's been pulling the strings." Nara plugged the data chip into a nearby terminal, her fingers flying over the controls. As the screen came to life, a series of encrypted files flashed across the screen. But one, near the bottom, caught her attention, a file labeled Project Malthar. Rylos leaned over her shoulder. "What's Project Malthar?" Nara opened the file, her face hardening as the words appeared on the screen. It was a list of names, dates, locations, and at the very top, there it was, Kale Draxon. Nara froze, her fingers trembling over the terminal. What the hell? Kale's name is on this list. This isn't just a conspiracy. This is about him. Rylos scrolled down, his brows furrowing. This goes deep. Whoever's behind this has been tracking the Vanguard, and they've been planning something much bigger. The data leads to a location near the Galactic core, a place we've never heard of before. This is more than just a rogue faction. This is coordinated, and Kal's involvement isn't a coincidence. Nara clenched her fist. We have to warn him. If they're targeting Kale, the whole team's in danger, and we're running out of time. Rylos stood, his expression hardening. We'll warn him, but first, we have to get out of here. Someone's going to come looking for these people, and they won't be happy about their little operation being exposed. As they began to make their way back to the surface, the weight of the discovery pressed down on them both. Whatever this Project Malthar was, it was connected to Earth's highest levels. Someone somewhere had turned the Vanguard into a pawn in a game they couldn't even begin to understand. And Kale was the key. The sound of their footsteps reverberated through the silent corridors of the facility as Nara and Rylos made their way back toward the surface. The data chip in Nara's hand felt heavier with each step, the weight of its implications pressing down on her chest. Kale's name, connected to Project Malthar, was a revelation they hadn't anticipated. The shockwaves of this discovery rippled through her mind, and a new, darker question emerged. What had Kale been involved in? The very idea that someone had orchestrated this entire operation to target him sent chills down her spine. For years, the Vanguard had been Earth's unsung protectors, and now it seemed their greatest asset, Kale himself, was at the center of a conspiracy that reached deeper than they could have imagined. Rylos was quieter than usual, his face unreadable as he kept his pace steady beside her. His mind was likely racing, trying to piece together the tangled mess of information they had uncovered. But for Nara, there was one thing that kept gnawing at her thoughts. What was Project Malthar, and why did it involve Kale? Rylos, she said softly, breaking the silence, we need to get back to the ship. We need to warn Kale, and fast. Rylos nodded, but his eyes darted around them warily. Agreed, but we're not the only ones looking for answers. If these people were involved in tracking the Vanguard, it's only a matter of time before they realize their operation has been compromised. Before Nara could respond, the air in the corridor shifted. A low hum vibrated through the walls, followed by a distant roar of engines. The unmistakable sound of a fleet approaching. Nara's instincts flared to life, and she didn't need to hear the next part to know the situation had just escalated. Incoming, Rylos muttered. His voice was clipped as he pulled a small portable communicator from his belt, tapping a few quick commands. We need to move now. They broke into a sprint, their boots pounding against the metal floors as they raced back toward the entrance. The last thing they needed was to get caught in the middle of a firefight in a dead colony. They reached the exit, only to find the entrance sealed shut. Damn it, Nara cursed under her breath. We're locked in. Rylos quickly checked the nearby terminal, his fingers moving swiftly across the interface as he bypassed the security systems. The hum of the approaching fleet grew louder, and the sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor behind them. The countdown had begun. Hold on, Rylos said, his voice tight. He tapped a final sequence into the terminal, and with a low whir, the metal door slid open just enough for them to squeeze through. Outside, the colony's skyline loomed dark and still against the starry expanse. The Vanguard ship, their only chance of escape, was parked just beyond the ruined city limits. They could see the familiar shape of the ship, an old but reliable vessel, standing silently in the midst of the surrounding chaos. But as they neared the ship, their hope was dashed in an instant. A massive warship, sleek and deadly, hovered overhead, its weapons bristling. The fleet they had heard was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived. Several smaller fighters peeled away from the larger vessel, zooming toward the surface at breakneck speed. This was no random patrol. These ships were part of the conspiracy. The same people who had been hiding in the shadows were now closing in on the Vanguard's only hope of escape. "We don't have much time," Rilo said, grabbing Nara by the arm and pulling her toward the ship. Just as they reached the entrance, the roar of engines grew deafening, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake. A blast of energy shot across the sky, slamming into a nearby building and sending debris flying in every direction. They dove into the ship just as the first enemy fighter strafed the ground near them, the air sizzling with the intensity of their weapons. Inside the ship, Kale's voice crackled over the intercom. "What's going on out there? I'm reading hostile ships closing in fast." Nara's eyes were already scanning the control panel, her fingers moving with purpose. "We've got company. Big company. We need to leave now." As Rylos and Nara quickly secured the ship, the fighter jets swooped closer, their weapons primed. But there was no time to discuss tactics or strategies. They had to escape before they were trapped here, exposed and vulnerable. The large warship still hung in orbit, its enormous cannons trained on their position. With a jolt, the ship's engines roared to life, and the Vanguard's vessel shot up from the ground, narrowly avoiding a missile that struck the colony's ruins in a blinding explosion. The fighters were close behind, but Nara's skill at the controls kept them ahead, threading their way through the tight canyon of destroyed buildings and the oncoming enemy. "Hold on," she shouted to Rylos as she maneuvered the ship into a series of evasive rolls, narrowly avoiding another barrage of fire. "We're not out of the woods yet." Rylos gritted his teeth, his hand gripping the seat tightly. "Just get us out of here. We can deal with the rest later." Cal's voice cut in again. "Status report. What's happening?" Nara's fingers danced across the navigation panel, initiating a jump sequence to the nearest hidden safe house. "We're in trouble, and we're bringing the storm with us." With a sudden lurch, the ship shot forward, jumping to hyperspace. The stars around them blurred into streaks of light as the Vanguard escaped the looming threat. But in the back of Nara's mind, one thought repeated over and over. "They know, and now we're the hunted." The stars blurred into streaks of light as the Vanguard ship hurtled through hyperspace, the faint hum of the engines underscoring the tense silence inside. Nara sat at the helm, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. She wasn't afraid of the unknown space beyond, but the pressing reality that they were now being hunted was a threat unlike any they had faced before. Every move, every decision could be their last. Rylos leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowed, scanning the readouts on his display. "We've put some distance between us, but not enough to shake them for good. They'll be tracking us as soon as we drop out of hyperspace." Nara didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced, running through the data they had gathered, piecing together the fragments of information about Project Malthar and its connection to Kale. What was Project Malthar? Why was Kale a target? The pieces were still scattered, too many questions and not enough answers. She glanced over at Rylos, his face tense but focused. "We need a plan. We can't just keep running. They know who we are, and they'll come for us again." Rylos exhaled sharply, leaning forward. "I agree, but for now, we're in the dark. All we've got is that file with Kel's name on it. We need to dig deeper, find out everything we can about Project Malthar. Whoever is behind this, They're pulling strings on a level we can't even comprehend, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next. The intercom crackled and Kale's voice came through, cutting the tension. Nara, Rylos, what's the situation? Nara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. We're in one piece for now, but we're not safe yet. They're tracking us, and they know we're coming for them. It's not just about the Vanguard anymore, Kale. You're part of something bigger. Project Malthar. Your name is on the list. There was a long pause on the other end, and when Kale spoke again, his voice was harder, colder than usual. Malthar? Damn it, I should have known. Nara's brow furrowed as she glanced back at Rylos. What do you know about it? Cal's voice lowered, a hint of frustration leaking through. Project Malthar was a shadow operation. My involvement was forced. They used me, used the Vanguard, for their own agenda, and I've been trying to track down the truth for years, but I never thought they'd go this far. The ship jolted slightly as the hyperspace jump ended, and the void of real space stretched out before them, dark and empty. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the control deck. Rylos straightened in his seat, his hand poised over his weapon. Nara opened a secure channel to Kale. Where are you now? Kale's voice crackled back through the comm, sounding distant. I've moved to the last known location where we might be able to dig up some more answers. There's a hidden base, deep within the outer rim. It's the only place where I think I can find something, anything, concrete about Malthar. Rylos met Nara's gaze, his eyes narrowing. The outer rim? That's dangerous. It's crawling with mercenaries and pirates. We're sitting ducks out there. We don't have a choice, Nara replied. If we want to stop this before it gets any worse, we need to go. Now. Kel's voice cut in, firmer now. I'll prepare the coordinates. Meet me at the rendezvous point, and be careful. They'll be waiting for us. The channel clicked off, and Nara set the course for the outer rim, her mind already running through the dangers that awaited them. If Kale was right, the hidden base was their only shot at uncovering the truth behind Project Malthar and stopping whatever dark plot was unfolding. But that wasn't the only danger they faced. Whoever was behind this had been tracking them for too long, and now they were part of something much bigger. The stakes were higher than ever before. As the ship's engines hummed to life again, pushing them toward their next destination, Nara felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for the future of humanity. Rylos leaned over, tapping a few commands into his console. We've got incoming. It's a small fleet, but they're coming in hot. They must have tracked us during the jump. Nara cursed under her breath and adjusted their course. We're not stopping, Rylos. We keep moving forward, no matter what. With the fleet closing in and danger looming at every turn, the Vanguard was about to face its most dangerous mission yet. And with Kale's life and the fate of humanity on the line, the stakes were higher than ever. The engines roared as the Vanguard ship surged forward, the dark expanse of space stretching out in all directions. Nara's hands gripped the controls tighter as she steered the ship toward the outer rim. The unknown had always been a dangerous place, but now it felt even more so. Their path was uncertain, but the consequences of failure were clear. Kale's life and the future of humanity hung in the balance. Rylos remained silent behind her, his eyes locked on the screens as he scanned for any sign of pursuit. The enemy fleet was closing in, a looming shadow that seemed to grow larger with every passing minute. They had to stay ahead. They had to make it to Kale. But time was not on their side. Nara's voice broke the silence, a hint of urgency threading through her words. How long before they catch up with us? Rylos didn't look up, his fingers dancing over the controls. At this rate, 15 minutes, maybe less. They're faster than us, but they're trying to stay under our radar. They'll wait until we're vulnerable. Nara cursed under her breath. Damn it, we don't have that long. The ship was running low on fuel, and their options were dwindling by the second. They needed a safe place to regroup, to plan, but there was no time. The rendezvous point with Kale was their only hope. A warning siren suddenly blared, jolting Nara from her thoughts. Red lights flashed on the control panel, and a holographic display popped up in front of her, showing a fleet of enemy ships rapidly closing in. They had been found. Incoming, Rylos shouted, jumping to his feet and heading for the weapons console. They're locking on. Nara's fingers flew over the controls, diverting power to the shields and weapons systems. "Brace for impact," she yelled, slamming the ship into a sharp roll to evade the first round of incoming fire. Explosions lit up the space around them as the enemy ships unleashed a barrage of plasma blasts. One of the shots clipped the Vanguard's left wing, sending a violent shudder through the ship. Warning lights flashed across the panels, and the sound of alarms filled the cabin. "We're losing altitude," Nara shouted, struggling to keep the ship steady. "Rylos, get to the engine room. We need more power to the thrusters." Rylos didn't hesitate, bolting toward the rear of the ship. Nara gritted her teeth, focusing on the controls as she fought to keep the Vanguard in the fight. The enemy ships were relentless, their weapons ripping through space like wildfire, but the Vanguard was nimble, more than a match for their tactics. She was determined to make it to Kale, no matter the cost. Come on, she muttered, watching the fuel reserves on the display dwindle with each passing second. Behind her, the ship shuddered again, and Rylo's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm rerouting power, but we've got major damage to the rear stabilizers. We won't be able to outrun them much longer." Nara didn't answer, her focus razor-sharp as she fought the controls. "I know," she whispered to herself. "We're not running anymore." Her decision was made. With a sharp motion, Nara turned the ship hard to the left, swinging it into a dangerous arc that sent the pursuing enemy ships off course. It was a reckless move, but the Vanguard had been built to survive situations like this. The ship groaned as it adjusted to the sudden change in direction, and Nara cursed as the systems began to protest. "Rylos, get ready," she said through gritted teeth. "We're making a stand." Rylos appeared moments later, his face grim. "What are you thinking?" Nara didn't look at him. "We're not running anymore. We need to make them think twice." She pulled the trigger, sending a volley of plasma rounds into the lead ship of the enemy fleet. The blast rocked the enemy vessel, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Still, it bought them a precious few seconds. The enemy fleet was closing in, but Nara was calculating now, thinking faster than she had in a long time. She knew they couldn't win this fight. There were too many of them, but they could hold their ground long enough to create an opening. The question was, how long could they last? "Hold on," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. "We're going in for a direct attack. Rylos, I need you to target their engines. We take them down, and we can make a run for it." Rylos nodded, sliding into the weapons seat. "Got it." Nara hit the thrusters and aimed the Vanguard directly at the lead enemy ship, launching them forward with terrifying speed. The enemy ships opened fire, but Nara was already pulling the ship into a sharp dive, narrowly missing their blasts. They were dangerously close now, too close for comfort. "Now," she shouted. Rylos fired, and the enemy ship's engines erupted in a fiery explosion, sending a shockwave through space that rocked their ship. The enemy fighters faltered, their momentum momentarily halted. But Nara knew this was only temporary. They needed to move fast. With their route open, she slammed the thrusters forward, sending the Vanguard into a high-speed climb toward the safety of the outer rim. But there was no time to celebrate. The real fight was about to begin, and everything hinged on whether Kale could give them the answers they needed before the enemy closed in for the kill. The Vanguard shot through the stars, the vast emptiness of space surrounding them like a dark ocean. The ship's engines hummed steadily now, though the damage was still significant. The battle had taken its toll, but Nara refused to let up. They had made it through the first wave of enemy forces, but the countdown to Kale's rendezvous was ticking down fast. Every second mattered. "We've bought ourselves some time," Rylos said, his voice strained as he inspected the damage to the ship's systems. "But we can't keep running forever. The fleet will regroup." Nara's grip tightened on the control panel. She didn't need Rylos to remind her. They were headed into the heart of enemy territory, and there was no going back now. If Kale was right, the hidden base in the Outer Rim held the key to ending the threat once and for all. If they didn't find the answers there, they would be walking straight into a trap with no escape. "I know," she replied, her tone cold and determined. "We need to get to Kale, and then we hit them where it hurts." Rylos nodded, his jaw tight. "What's the plan after we rendezvous?" "We find out everything we can about Project Malthar," Nara said, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the vast expanse before them. "We take down whoever's behind it, and we do it before they can do any more damage." The comms crackled to life, and Kale's voice came through, rough but steady. "Nara, Rylos, we're close. The base is just ahead. I've got everything prepared on this end. Once you arrive, we'll have to move fast. They know we're coming." Nara didn't hesitate. "We're almost there. Hold tight." As the Vanguard neared the coordinates Cal had sent, the quiet was deafening. The final confrontation was imminent. Kale had promised answers, but would they be enough to stop the escalating war? The forces that had been hunting them were only one part of the puzzle. The real enemy lay in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes, and they had to be stopped now. Suddenly, the sensors pinged. A small fleet appeared on the radar, emerging from the asteroid field ahead. The enemy had caught up faster than expected. "Incoming!" Rylos shouted, already in motion, locking into his seat. "We've got a full fleet this time." Nara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to let them get in their way. Not now, not when they were so close. "Set the course for the base. I'll take care of the rest." The enemy ships were quick to react, opening fire as they charged in. But this time, the Vanguard was ready. Nara expertly maneuvered the ship, dodging the incoming blasts with precision that spoke to her years of experience. The small fleet had been quick, but they weren't fast enough to catch her off guard. "We'll never make it to Kale if we don't clear a path," Rylos said, already preparing the ship's weapons. Nara's fingers danced over the controls. "I'll hold them off. Just make sure the rear stabilizers hold. We're going straight through them." Rylos gave her a determined nod, focusing on his task. "You've got it." The Vanguard surged forward, closing the distance between them and the enemy fleet. Nara could see the bright bursts of enemy fire streaking toward them, but she stayed focused, cutting through the incoming attacks like a blade through the dark. She spun the ship into a roll, narrowly avoiding one blast that would have torn through the hull, then fired back, sending a volley of plasma rounds into the enemy fleet. The first wave of enemy ships exploded in a burst of fire, but more kept coming. A few ships broke off to flank them, but Nara was ready. She activated the ship's defensive systems, launching countermeasures that disrupted the targeting systems of the approaching ships. "Almost there," she said, gritting her teeth. "Keep those engines running, Rylos." Rylos's voice came through, steady even under pressure. "We're almost through, but they're not backing off." The Vanguard shook as another blast rocked the ship, this time damaging the left wing. But Nara didn't flinch. She pushed the ship harder, focusing on the single goal ahead. The asteroid field loomed closer, the hidden base within reach. "Now," Nara shouted, her eyes locked on the dark mass of rock and metal in the distance. She pulled the controls, sending the Vanguard into a sharp dive toward the base, narrowly avoiding the last barrage of enemy fire. The ships chasing them followed, but the asteroid field would give them the cover they needed. Just as the base came into view, Cal's voice crackled through the comms again, urgent. "Get in here now. They're setting up a trap. Hurry." Nara's heart raced. There was no turning back. The time for hesitation was over. "We're coming in hot," Nara said, her voice resolute. "Stay sharp." As they descended into the heart of the hidden base, the Vanguard systems screamed in protest, the ship battered but unbroken. Ahead, the final confrontation awaited. Everything they had fought for, everything they had risked, would come down to this moment. They had no choice but to face it head-on. The Vanguard dropped into the base's cavernous docking bay, the ship's engines cutting off with a hiss. The door slid open, revealing Kale, standing ready for what was to come. Behind him, the true battle for humanity's future was about to begin. With a deep breath, Nara unstrapped herself from her seat and turned toward the exit. "Let's end this," she said quietly, her resolve solid as steel. And with that, they stepped into the unknown, ready to confront the forces that threatened to destroy everything they held dear. The final battle was about to begin.